We have a problem also, don't we, with the European arrest warrant, which means that people in this country can now be arrested by people from overseas. They just come along, if you like, knock on the door, and they have an arrest warrant to take you away to, well, recently Portugal, and at other times Romania. And I remember the Greeks. The Greek one was the plane spotters. They did plane spotting, didn't they? And it's against the law. It was against the law. So they probably didn't know they shouldn't have been plane spotting. That could be disputed, but that's what they said. And they were arrested. Now, in the old days, if that had happened, and the Greeks had said, we're arresting people for plane spotting, the British government would have turned around and said, too bad, it's not illegal in the UK. We can plane spot if we want to. You can't have them. And in those days, the Greeks would have then had to have applied, wouldn't they, for extradition, an extradition order. And the government would have turned it down. But these days, the Greeks have every right to take people away for plane spotting or whatever else they might have done that breaks their law, because they can do it. So watch out when you're on holiday, folks, and make sure nobody goes on holiday that looks like you, because we've had people taken away wrongly who they think have done things that haven't, because they're mistaken identity. So watch out for the European arrest warrant.
With the situation in Greece, where they're having an awful monetary problem.
Yeah.
The same in Italy.
Yeah.
How long is this going to go on before the Greek economy explodes?
Yeah.
And what effect is it going to have on the European Union?
Okay, that's a brilliant question, and it's all to do with the eurozone and the fact that they've got the euro and we haven't. Now, that's something else we're being told has to be eventually, because we've now signed the Lisbon Treaty, and one of the terms in that treaty is that the currency of the union will be the euro. So again and again this is going to turn up, and we're going to be told how we must vote for this euro and how we must take it in. And the downside of it is exactly what's happening in Greece. Mark it, watch it, and certainly take in what's going on. Because what's going on is, when you join a currency like that across all borders, one size has to fit all. Your economy has to be as good as the German economy or whoever's making the pace. So your interest rates and also your inflation rates and all the other rates should be in harmony. Well, they're not. The Greeks are having a hard time because they've priced themselves out. They can't devalue, and the population is suffering because they can't raise taxation sufficiently to actually placate their population, who are on the verge of rioting and have rioted over the past few months. And that economy is shot, actually. In a normal free market, they would devalue their own currency and start again. But they can't, because they've got the euro, so they don't have that option. And the only thing they can do to get out of it is increase taxation. And the locals, the actual Greeks, won't allow that to happen, because they won't be ground into the dirt. So they're rioting instead at the moment. God knows what's going to happen. Perhaps they'll be bailed out. Perhaps the Germans will come up and say, well, never mind about that. We'll give you a secret loan of so many billion euro to get out. And by the way, you owe it to us forever. I don't know. Somebody's got to do something for the Greeks. But it isn't just the Greeks that are having problems. It's also the Portuguese, the Irish, the Spanish, and also the Italians to some degree. They're all suffering with their economies because they don't fit the euro. So when somebody tells you to vote for the euro because it's easy to spend it when you go on holiday, and that's about the best argument they could come up with last time, as if that was the crucial reason why we join a new currency and throw away our ability to manage our own economy, because that's what you're doing. Once you've thrown away the ability to manage your own economy, you've flushed your own country down the toilet. There's nothing to manage. And these buffoons in Parliament would then have absolutely nothing to do, would they? Because they wouldn't even really have to deal with taxation or interest rates, because the EU would take all that over. And you know, why, you might ask me, well, why is it then that our economy is different to the German and French economies, etc.? Well, it's different because we do things differently, because it's been our tradition to do things differently. An example would be mortgages. Most people in this country own their own premises. Many do. The bigger percentage anyway than in France and Germany, where they rent property. So if the Chancellor here increases interest rates by 1%, it's a big deal. People howl because all their mortgages are going to go up. If you do the same thing in France, they don't, because they rent places and it doesn't hurt them as badly. And so there's a single example of how one size doesn't fit all. And so, you know, as I said when I started, the regulations don't either, even on things like milk jugs, because they don't use milk jugs.
Why the dickens do they just ignore the fact that all that money is going down the European drain when we need it so much in our country? They're all saying how short of money they are, aren't they?
Absolutely, but they can't see any further than the fact that they think it's a wonderfully humanitarian thing to do, to share everything with Europe. And they think that this is good for the future of mankind, that we should all be together in one continent called Europe and do everything together. It's like a dream. They're all living in cloud cuckoo land. They don't look at the downside. They're not interested in that. They voted for example, the Conservatives voted for Romania to come into the EU. They didn't just vote for it, they introduced them. But the worse than that, on the same day, Bulgaria came in. The UKIP voted against Bulgaria and Romania coming in on the basis we didn't want to deprive them of their independence, you see. But in point of fact, they're very expensive. The Bulgarians have failed to account for the money that they've had from the EU last year. No wonder the EU budget hasn't balanced for 15 years and has been thrown out by the auditors on all those consecutive occasions. This time it's the Bulgarians who have failed to account for the money they've had. And UKIP asked a couple of Bulgarians to come in and explain how that possibly could happen. And we had two of them come along. And we asked them why it had happened, and this is the truth, because it sounds as if it's not. The Bulgarian MEP said, well, it's not the Bulgarian government's fault, because the Bulgarian government report to the Bulgarian Mafia, and they've got the money. And that was the explanation. I mean, we were just absolutely horrified that he'd actually stand up and say something like that, but he did. And he said he couldn't do anything about it because the Mafia had got the money. And we said, well, how are they going to account for it? And he says, well, they can't. Well, the EU have asked them to account for it, and they've put the screws on them to do that. And, of course, the Bulgarians are crying their eyes out, saying we want some more money this year. And the EU is saying, not until you've told us where the last lot went. So they are trying to put some control over it. But how silly is that?